Good evening. Uh, Welcome to this last day of February. And tonight in our workshop, we have a number of items. First and foremost, we have an audit report presentation and discussion of our budget, the first of what will be a number of discussions on our budget. And I'm going to ask Mr. Pepe, once he's able to get his technology together there, to make introductions. You know, while the presentation is being put together, perhaps we can move to item C, the construction update. The facility committee had a meeting. We have another one scheduled for tomorrow. We're reviewing a number of items with respect to the stadium project. I don't know if any members of the committee or Mr. Lysette, if you had any thoughts on progress, but there certainly is some.
Yeah, I can share that David Horn from Architera was at that meeting. He shared some requests after discussion with the township, and I'm guessing we'll discuss tomorrow if there's been a response given to the township and address some of the questions that they had, such as the parking on the sloped field during football games, things such as that. Essentially, the next big discussion is how we're going to put the project out to bid, how we're going to go about looking at different options through the state and through other available options to look at essentially the process to build the field. Right. The biggest issue right now is just getting the approval from the township to do so. And I think we're progressing where by end of May, that might be a realistic time frame for a go or no go from the township.
Yeah, I think good progress is being made, and there are all reports indicate the township is being cooperative in their efforts to review our application, which is complex by necessity because a lot of earth is being moved for the
in the environmentally sensitive zone that the field sits in, that this whole complex pretty much sits in. So tomorrow should be, I think, informative in terms of what's taking place, what the response is, and putting a little bit more direction to the process by which we're going to look at the options that we'll have to select a contractor, I'll call it, to build the field and the stands and everything that goes with that in the complex.
Are we still looking in the same footprint as the current stadium, right?
Yes, sir, we are.
Okay.
Yeah, we're essentially going to keep the away stands where they are. The home stands will come down, and even the building that is there as concessions right now, and a little bit of storage, but mostly concession. The plan right now is for that building to stay. I think a future looking plan would include if that building were to be demolished, or if it stays and we add more building space underneath the stands, like many of the stadiums like that have, make sure that we build it in such a way that we can easily do that without repositioning the supports and such for the stands. But essentially, it will be in the same footprint, although the home stands, I believe, will come back closer to the middle school building. And if possible, possibly an 8-lane track, but more likely a 6-lane track like we have now, but essentially stretching so that we have a larger field in the track space and more of a regulation soccer field, which is much larger than what we have there now. But same footprint, more or less.
I thought that when we had originally discussed,
You're on.
okay, that is, how many lanes do you need for it to be competition worthy of the track? Is it 8 or is it 6?
So 6 is for competition. If you wanted to be a host facility for districts, I believe you would have to have 8, but that's usually very limited and usually goes out to a college space.
And we're not looking to do that. I'm
yeah.
fine if we're not, I'm just out.
Yeah, and there's been some preliminary discussions and things like that some entities feel they can put an 8-lane track there. Others feel it can only be a 6. So I think as we get closer and closer to actually putting the final plans in place, it's a matter of who's doing the work and if it can or can't, and what the reality is once you do the build, if it can go in comfortably and not put the stands on top of the middle school.
I just had a question too about that. So when you mentioned the field being expanded to allow for more of the field events, would you be able to put, in a thought at least in the planning stages, would you be able to put all the field events you think in there? Because right now they're kind of like scattered to wherever they can fit them in. I'm just curious. I'm just curious, would we be able to accommodate them all, I guess?
The history of why they're scattered and they're not all in the stadium is at one time the recommendation, I believe it came from Architera, was that you have no more than 24 events on the high school stadium field per year.
No.
And that's why the spring sports in particular had 3 stadium games for men's lacrosse, women's lacrosse, and track and field doesn't really use the field.
Right, yeah.
And I can't think of another spring sport that would have used it. So it was pretty much lacrosse was limited, only 3 games. And that's why the soccer field was used initially. And you have the field that connects the connector road between the 2 schools. The discussion and what most other districts do is all of your varsity and junior varsity events would be in the stadium if that's the type of field that they should be on.
Meaning the field events for track and field is what I was talking about, just so.
Well, the track and field, then you would have to still schedule potentially
Right, okay.
around because you
I don't
can't
think you
do
could fit-
track and
that'd be a
field
lot.
and a lacrosse game at the same time. It's just not
I'm thinking
going to
like
work.
discus, shot put, just so we're clear. Well, we don't do javelin in middle school
Well,
anyway.
I
but
believe,
Thankfully, I think.
and correct me if I'm wrong, but the javelin and the shot put are actually off to the side.
Well, discus and shot put are, yeah,
Yeah,
which makes sense. But I'm just thinking like it's just a little confusing, but I'll figure it
yeah,
out. as we go.
yeah. But all of those, they're off to the side, and they would remain off to the side. You would have, your high jump and those activities taking place in the stadium area. Yeah.
Mr. Pepe has an introduction and a presentation tonight. Mr. Pepe.
Right, it's on? Okay. So first of all, this evening is a pretty interesting evening for us in the business office because we're giving an update on the budget, but it starts really with the audit because there's a lot of information that we gleaned from the audit, and then we start moving forward working with that information. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mark Anderson, who's been the auditor for a number of years here from Frost, Anderson, and Basil.
Good evening, everybody. I was requested to come present the audit results in the last audit as of June 30th, 21. Quite a voluminous report. I don't make up the contents of what goes into this. The governmental accounting standards board suggests the format and footnotes and the required disclosures. We adhere to that reporting purpose. There's 3 basic opinions in this report. There's one on the financial statements, one on compliance, and one on internal control. All those opinions are what they call unmodified opinions. weaknesses within the systems, and no significant deficiencies were exposed when we did the audit. It's a clean report, as some people used to refer to it in prior years. A short discussion on presenting an audit report is a very good thing when you have a long-winded conversation saying, I dealt with 53,000 issues, then that's a problem. A short conversation in regards to presenting an audit report is a good thing. Any questions, comments? If anybody had any concerns when they went through it or looked at it?
No, but when you're ready to move on, I do have a question on a slightly different subject.
Question for me?
Yeah, when you're finished up, unless anyone else
I
has
have nothing
questions.
more to say. So.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Well, and maybe just as, I mean, we had in addition to no findings, which is always a positive thing, you do have results for the year, and some insight perhaps into prior years or what it bodes for the future. Just maybe some of your thoughts as our auditor on, where we stand financially. Anything jumps off you, the report. Just your insights into the actual financial workings of the district during our past year and perhaps before in years prior.
I have developed, I put together a 7-year little spreadsheet that you folks don't have in regards to the trends of the school district calendar. From 2015 through 2021, your operating revenues and expenses has nothing to do with comparison to budget, just the actual numbers. Over the past 7 years, your operating expenditures have exceeded your operating revenues by about $800,000, which over a 7-year period in some of the economic times we've gone through is really not a bad thing. The trend is this year we've had a better year, a little bit due to some of the COVID money that flowed through from the federal government. But overall, you've had a decent fund balance. Right now, your unassigned fund balance is about 6% of budget. That's within the guidelines of the state. They don't have a problem going up to 8%. So that could be addressed. But overall, I haven't had any really significant issues over the course of my years performing the audit.
Do I understand that you were involved in and potentially started the Southern Lehigh Educational Foundation? Yeah. I just wanted to know, what's the current status of that organization? And I think you still, to my knowledge from last year when I was looking into it, that you get tax returns on that, right? Yeah, so there's a balance, in other words, right?
Off the top of my head, there's about $30,000.
Yeah, that's great. So what is the status of that organization right now?
It's in a state of disarray. Probably 2 years ago, again, going off memory, there was 4 or 5 of the significant board members all resigned. It just left a couple people there, and virtually nothing financially or even operationally is going on with that organization. It's basically generating interest off the investments. For that organization to succeed, there need to be an infusion of new blood. People that want to get this entity going. The current operators have actually asked me to look into disbanding that organization and what procedures must be done. I gave them procedures with the IRS of what would need to be done to just end the entity. That has been discussed on there.
Yeah, and I think that's a shame. So
I agree. Like I said, I was one of the founding members of that.
yeah.
Spent a fair amount of time raising money for that organization.
Yeah, I think it would be a great way for us to add additional buffers and other compensations for budget shortfalls on capital campaigns and other improvements in the facilities or in other activities. And it could be a great way to do it. I'm involved in a couple of schools that have that, and they're quite strong, and they've had it quite strong organizations such as that for decades, and it becomes a great tool to pool, as you well know, fundraising for good intentions within the school district.
Correct. There were lofty ambitions way back when it was originally started to get to that size of a foundation where you could fund a lot of programs. I've got to say that we were pretty much small potatoes with that. We would put out proposals to various schools with teachers that wanted to do X, Y, Z project, but there was no money in the budget. So we had RFPs that come in and say, what do you want to do? What do you want to do for this money and how can we fund this? We did a lot of that back 10, 15 years ago. And again, the last 8 years, that organization is just disintegrated.
Yeah, so I think it might be to the benefit of the board and the school district to talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. We have capital investments happening, some big expenditures happening, and, I think it would be a great way to maybe resurrect that and get the right people involved to lead it and to begin expanding it and make it into hopefully a self-sustaining entity that could give back to the school district for many years in the future. Would you have interest in working with the? Yes. Sure.
I don't believe this board even meets on an annual basis.
Yeah.
Basically, you go to the treasurer, like, give me the bank statement so I can at least file a tax return, keep you in compliance with the IRS.
Yeah. Yeah, I had to do that one time for a nonprofit as well, and you keep getting the tax forms and moving it forward, even though something may have been disbanded. So,
If there was a core group of people that would really be interested in getting this thing going again, I'd be more than happy to get the two parties together.
Actually, there was this has been brought up once or twice as an idea that has been floated over the past couple of years, once that organization became more inactive. And I agree with your description of it was a smaller operation that would get individual teacher grants and things like that, right? And is this working? Is this working? No?
It's not. No, it's not.
Can I borrow someone else's mic? Okay, I think I'm good. I'll hold the cord. Thanks. Sorry, what was I? So yes, it was kind of a small, and the idea with construction and other items that are coming up, bigger expenditure, PSBA offers, and I've attended quite a few conferences and workshops on how to make and how a board can support a successful program like that. And one of the things that the board brought up in its informal discussions and formal discussions in workshop was that the key to success to taking it to that kind of a big next level, other than the scholarships and teacher grants you mentioned, was having a part-time or full-time person on staff whose salary was essentially paid for by the funds that were generated and raised. Parkland put on a great workshop that I attended. They have a wonderful program, and I'm not suggesting that we could compete with that kind of size of school, but I have attended. They have a great one, but it involves a collaborative effort between the board supporting it and supporting it through a staff person, which will eventually pay for itself and bring in even more money, and a board that'll support it, and a superintendent and a core group of folks, then business people from the community. But the key point there was having a person on staff at central office. So that's something I would love to pursue as a board, not as an additional expenditure, but one that would pay for itself and then some over the years. I'd be glad to talk about that again and attend those again. They were very informative.
And we'll compete with any size school.
I'm sure,
on the way.
Dr. Mahan, I'm sure you're up for it. Yes,
we are.
Those were very exciting and exhilarating to sit in those workshops with PSBA and to hear our local folks talk about.
But I think it's great. And I do want to thank Mr. Anderson, not only for his fine work on the audit, but also for his long-standing devotion to the Southern Lehigh School District and our community. So that you got drawn in on that aspect as well, too. So we want to thank you again for your fine work on the audit and for your devotion to this community. So thank you, Mr. Anderson, very much.
Okay, and I can tell you as a business administrator how exciting it is to get a great audit like that, but it's certainly not mine. The audits are always done the year past, so Henshaw and the business office and the administration of the district have a lot to be proud of. So I'm going to start taking you through some of the information that's really going to lead into our budget preparation. And a lot of it comes from the audit, and I do appreciate Mark's time with us. So first of all, I'm going to try and capture a little bit better the timeline for the budget process. I started talking about this the last time I presented. There's above the line and below the line. The actions above the line are actually board actions. The actions below the line are going to be administration actions as we move through the process. So I start back here where in November, the board passed a resolution limiting the 2022-23 tax increase to the index of 3.4%. So that action was already taken, already completed. Last month, I gave a preliminary presentation on draft budget, which included a highlight of LCCC and IU21. So they've already kind of been covered, and they're already moving forward as we develop each of the category budgets. We're about 80% complete at this point as far as getting information in. Some of the categories that are still outstanding are some of the big ones like benefits. I have to start meeting with the administration to review their budgets that were presented, because everything's in a draft stage at this time. Dr. Mann and I will be going through eventually to look at the final programs and or personnel, because that's really where the biggest part of the budget is going to take place. So you see here I have in yellow February, March, and April. For February, we have the audit presented for approval tonight, so we'll be moving that forward. And then on the bottom is the presentation update I'm going to be giving on expenses, revenues, and the trend, and also the LCTI budget, which is a significant impact on our budget. From February through April, you notice there's no board action needed because we're not seeking any exemptions. We're not looking to exceed the Act 1 indicator. So in March, we're going to continue with the review on revenue projections. Again, Dr. Mann and myself will be looking at a lot of the personnel and overall putting some of the categorical budget together to see what it's going to look like when we get to April and come back to the board for proposed draft budget. And that's to get our 30 days so we can get our numbers out there and get people give people the opportunity to see what's coming before them. You'll notice on the bottom, I have review final staffing recommendations. That's what the superintendent will have been doing, along with the 22-23 proposed draft budget to move forward. And then by May, we're expecting to get approval on the final budget. And with each of these actions, before we ask you to vote on something, we always go through and provide a thorough explanation and understanding where things are. So that's kind of what the budget timeline looks like for this year. And now I want to capitalize on one of the things the auditor has provided for us, and that is our fiscal position at year end, what the past 7 years looks like. So the one key piece that comes out is where we actually are, whether or not we have an excess or a deficiency. So looking at the past 7 years, we've only closed 2 out of 7 with a positive cash balance. And that is $517,000 up here, if you can't read the number, and $420,000 in 2015. All the red indicates years in which we actually had a deficit. However, when you look at the transfers that came out to cover other deficits like capital projects, it's really a picture that looks more like this. In here, you'll come over and you'll see 2015, that excess got erased and it's down 637,000, down 878,000, down a million, down 786, 396, 565, and only one of the 7 years, which is the current 21, do we actually close with a positive cash flow. So what are the effects on fund balance or surplus? It starts up here with a conscious decision to draw down surplus from a historical high of 18.2 million in 2015. That allowed for 0 budget increases in fiscal years 2016 and 2019. So some of the utilization of fund balance is purposeful based on where that fund balance was. I think you heard Mr. Anderson say we're at about 6%. We're permitted to be up to 8%. Some boards may feel that they don't necessarily want to be at 8%, but you certainly don't want to fall below 4% or 5%. So we're currently at 6.1% or 4.2 million in unreserved, undesignated. And that's important to understand, unreserved, undesignated. That's like rainy day account. That's if something were to befall the budget that we didn't have planned for, we'd be able to utilize our unreserved, undesignated to cover it. And that's fund balance compared that permits, compared to our permitted 5.5 million in accordance with Act 48 of 2003. That's where it sets the maximum that you're allowed to permit. So continued management of fund balances against rising costs is where we continue to focus in development of a budget that meets the needs of the district in a fiscally responsive manner that ensures maintaining quality program. Because that's the other thing that we have to balance. We're committed to ensuring that we have a quality, well-run district with great program. So that's how we will be focused as we move through preparation of the budget. So here, this slide shows the change in total fund balance. I'm sorry, do you have a question?
Yeah, Lou, what's the total with the reserved and designated fund balance?
That's this slide right here.
Okay.
Okay, good question. You were reading ahead. So the change in total fund balance, if you look back at 2015, it was 18.2 million, and currently the total is 14.8. So the unreserved, undesignated is a portion of that, but that's the grand total. And as I explained before, you can see the drawdown from 18 to 14. So that's what's transpired in the last 7 years. So a need for balanced budgets. Balanced budgets do a couple of things. It starts with avoidance of depleting healthy fund balance. If we continue to spend more than we have revenue to support, we're going to keep eating away at fund balance, and eventually we'll get to a point where it's a major, major concern. Also, we want to maintain tax levy stability in our budgeting. That's one of the main principles with balanced budgets. Ensure against artificially deflating the true cost of the budget. So what do I mean? If you keep throwing fund balance at a budget, what you're doing is you're artificially deflating the true cost when your budget is, trajectory is actually going up. Then eventually you run out of fund balance, and now you're going to go skyrocketing up. No, because you run into a problem with the cap. And that's where we would be in a position we would have to go out above the cap. So we want to guard against future funding cliffs or drastic cuts that slash program and personnel. And here you see the cycle for curricular excellence, and I think we're going to have a presentation tonight on something along this line. But with the excellent academic program that we have in the district, we want to retain those quality programs. So let's take a quick look at the expenditures versus the revenues. Tenets of responsible budgeting start with, we need to maintain our ability to manage fund balance. That's why I spent so much time on that tonight. We need to ensure our expenditures are supported by available revenue. We need to ensure sustainability in supporting expenditures in out years, considering 5-year budget projections, not just looking at what the impact is going to be for next year. And a zero-based approach to budgeting ensures that all expenses are supported based on actual need and based on what those needs are throughout the district by building. So you see ZBB is zero-based budgeting and site-based budgeting. We have to combine the two so we ensure that we're getting what we need throughout the district when we need it, not just adding to everybody's budget. And as you can see from this chart, expenditures are outpacing revenues. And that's just a visual to show you the numbers actually support it. But each year, our expenditures are growing and the revenues have actually come down. compared to the expenditures as far as what percent of the overall budget they support. So that's pretty much from what I pulled out of the audit. And again, I appreciate the fact that you gave us the additional information from prior years. So last time we talked about the L-Tri-C and we talked about the IU-21. So tonight we're going to focus on the Lehigh Career Technical Institute. Now their overall budget is $22.6 million, and the increase this year is 3.5%, which is pretty much in line with what we were seeing with some of the other partnerships we have. But our share of that is an increase of 10.8%. So how can we be increasing at 10.8% when their overall budget is only going up 3.5%? Here's why. They have three basic buckets that they put this budget into. The general overall estimated net cost for us is $1,052,000. Our share of the capital cost is $34,084. Now those two are up 13% of 18%, and the total debt service is 298, which is an increase of 7,900, or an increase of 2.7 compared with the 2021-2022 budget. So how is that possible? It's all based on the approved funding formula, and they break it down into two basic categories. The change in the market total share starts with change in enrollment. So if you look here, Southern Lehigh 4 years ago was attributed 4.1% of the budget based on enrollment. Now it's up to 5.3%. I actually looked into the enrollment figures, and to no surprise, we've doubled our enrollment over the last 4 years. So 4 years ago, I think we had 40-something students there. Guidance reported today, we have close to 100, about 90-something. So it's a good thing. We have more utilization, so therefore we're getting more percentage of the overall bill. The other way they look at the formula is change in valuation. They looked at the 2020 market values and the 2021 percentage market value, or market value as a percentage. And again, we're doing well as a community. So to give a better breakdown, I actually put this chart together, and there's no way you're going to see the numbers, but just look at the colors and I'll kind of help you with the numbers. So what I did is I stacked it from highest to lowest as far as change in value over the 4-year time period. So you see in blue represented 2019-20, and the yellow represents 22-23. So Parkland, for instance, is the highest mover from 28% to 29.3%. Whitehall, Copley, if I'm saying that correct, is, I'm working on it, is they're moving from 8.25 down to 7.82. So Southern Lehigh here is number 3 as far as the gains in this group. And that's important because if you go to the middle, it's almost like a property revaluation. Everybody at the front end went up higher, everybody at the bottom end went down in the redistribution of the overall bill. So that's kind of how that shakes out. So then I looked at what are the actual cost drivers of their budget, and you find the big 3. It starts with health benefits up 12%, dental's actually down 5%. That is our numbers as well, because we're in the same joint pool. So that's what we're going to end up with this year. Another big struggle is PSERS. It's now 35.26%. Last year was 34.9%. That's $162,800 of extra load on their budget alone. And our numbers are going to be up there too. The last category is just other benefits, increase of $31,800 Social Security, unemployment, workers' comp, and they had $9,400 added for planned retirements or severance. And that may change as retirees announce their retirements, but at budget time, we have to budget on basically what we know. So hopefully that gives you a little better insight into what some of the drivers are and what some of the concerns are as far as overall fund balance. Are there any questions? Go ahead.
Last year, we looked at the impact of charter schools, and it absolutely went up from previous years. What is the recent impact, and is it coming down from last year?
It's definitely up, and it's very concerning from a budgetary perspective. I believe we're 32% under budgeted in the current year, based on what the actuals were to what was budgeted. So the number's definitely gone up. And I'm thinking of parking it somewhere around 2.7 mil. It's pretty significant at this point.
Lou, how much of the increase in revenue this past year was due to COVID funds?
I really don't know all of that because I wasn't here at the time it was coming out, but it's two things that happened. Number one, we got a lot of revenue to offset what would have been expenditures. And then there are other expenditures that you did not incur because of the way things were shut down. That's pretty much typical of most districts, so I'm sure that had a big, play here as well. But as far as the actual amount of revenue, I don't know. Dr. Mann, do you know what the revenue numbers were that came in from the grants here?
No, well, and some of it is spent, unspent when we're booking them. So I think that we could say that we did experience a surplus last year, but if we were to make all else equal outside of COVID, we would have been looking at another deficit. Now, we'll quantify that to the best we can, but we can take no consolation in the fact that we had a small positive result because those are non-recurring witnesses and non-recurring.
Any other questions?
And I coming months, we need to have some very challenging discussions as we go forward, because with those who have come before us have done actually a very good job in that we are sitting on $14 million of fund balance, down from I think 18 or close to 20 million in fund balance. So those resources were accumulated over time, and they are there to afford us time that we must use well, because we could do little and appear to be fine, but we would be setting up those who come after us for extreme distress. And so we now have to begin a community conversation, and it occurs here because you are representatives of the community, and those conversations we'd prefer not to have, but they will talk about programs, adjustments in programs, potentially eliminations of programs. We will be talking about tax rates and potentially increases in tax rates. Those are all very much community values that we will do our very best, and we are aggressively moving to control costs. We could demonstrate, I think, great progress already in this particular fiscal year, but going forward, we are going to be presented with challenges, and I know we're up to it, but it will be a very challenging discussion. And I want to emphasize, because of the work that has gone before us, we do not have to take drastic action now. And our thought is that we will avoid future boards from having to take drastic action, but we need to take focused action and begin a very serious process as we move forward. And again, I very much look forward to it, because it will not be all cuts. We will hear tonight about a program that we will be funding fully with respect to ELA and teaching kids to read, but there may be other programs that we have to reconsider in light of the challenges we face and the burdens that are being borne by our taxpayers. So that's just by way of introduction. I thank Mr. Pepe. We are in very good hands in the work that he'll be doing, and I look forward again to working with the board on this challenging topic.
And just to follow up to your question on the chart, because I now have the numbers. In 2021 budget, it was 1.7 million budgeted. Actuals for 2021 were 2.9 million. So in the current proposed budget, at this point, I have 2,750,000 reserved cash. Now, our hope is that we're going to see a lot of students returning now that we get our school programs back to running full-time in the way that they typically have been. So I believe that the big spike had a lot to do with COVID, and we're not the only district that experienced that. But it definitely is a concern. So if there's no other questions, I appreciate it.
And I would just also want to commend the board in saying, we look at 5 years because 1 year of budgeting is only of limited value. We have to project forward. And one of the things that we use as we project forward is the district's debt profile. And we see in the not too distant future, some relief with respect to debt coming off our books. And I go back to a very challenging decision that some members here and some of your predecessors made with respect to delaying a very large aspirational project. And had that not been done, our debt profile would look very different than it is now. And so we have a safe harbor to look forward to in coming years that would not have been there had the board not taken what I believe to be a very responsible yet profoundly difficult decision at the time. And so, again, I'm confident we will be looking at the long term. And again, I look forward to working on this project with this board.
Mr. Pepe, I just wanted to let you know that when I was at the Joint Operating Committee, we went through the budget. I think, obviously a very detailed and well-done analysis, I think, on their part. And just to support your efforts, as well as I do, there's very little we can do as a school district to change the numbers at LCTI. That's pretty much is what it is. It's what I would say probably a minimal increase compared to, what could be done, but just wanted to comment on that.
And that concludes the workshop session of tonight's meeting.
Just let the board stand up and stretch a little bit, and then we'll call the meeting to order.